"You don't belong here, and neither does that cabin." Those were the very first words HOA Karen threw at me the morning I moved back into my grandfather's lake ranch. I had just unloaded the last box, dust still swirling in the gravel driveway, when she stormed across the road like a queen inspecting her kingdom. The lake shimmered behind her, the guest cabin sat peacefully under the pines, and all I wanted was a quiet life. But Karen wasn't about to allow peace. She didn't even bother with introductions, didn't ask my name, didn't welcome me to the neighborhood. Instead, she planted herself right in front of my porch steps, hands on her hips, and barked out her demands like I was some tenant she controlled. I stared at her for a second, thinking maybe she was joking, but no, she was dead serious. She jabbed a manicured finger toward the guest cabin, a small log structure tucked about 30 yards away near the waterline. My grandfather built it years ago for fishing buddies and visiting family, and it was one of the reasons I loved this property so much. It had history. It had memories. And it was mine. Yet here stood Karen declaring, that guest cabin needs to be made available for HOA use. My daughter and her family are flying in next weekend, and it's the perfect place for them to stay. Since it's not being occupied, the community has priority. I laughed, not out of rudeness, but pure disbelief. I thought maybe she had misunderstood something. "Lady," I said calmly, "that cabin isn't for rent, isn't for loan, and sure isn't for you. That's my family's property, and it stays in my family." She didn't flinch. Instead, she smirked and lifted a thick leather binder she'd been carrying under her arm. The cover had HOA embossed in gold, and she flipped it open like she was about to deliver the 10 Commandments. Page 32, subsection B. All unused dwellings within the HOA boundaries may be repurposed for community benefit. You don't get to just keep a building sitting there empty while others have needs. That would be selfish. She said it with such authority, like her little book outweighed a century of deed records and property rights. I shook my head slowly. That binder doesn't mean a thing on my land. My grandfather owned this place before your HOA was even dreamed up. It's private property, period. You have no say. That set her off. She snapped the binder shut, her lips twitching like she'd bitten into something sour. "You'll regret speaking to me like that," she hissed. "I'm on the HOA board. We always win. If you don't comply, you'll be fined daily until you surrender use of that cabin. And if the fines stack up, well, don't be surprised if we move to foreclose. You may think you're special, but we know how to handle people like you." She spun around, stomping back down my driveway, muttering to herself about entitled cabin squatters. I stood there, stunned at her audacity, but also amused. She clearly had no clue who she was dealing with. My family wasn't ordinary. My father had served in law enforcement, my mother in the federal courts, and several of my cousins worked across different agencies. We weren't the type to get pushed around by a homeowners association, especially not one run by a self-appointed queen bee like Karen. That night, as I unpacked in the main house, I sat by the window with a view of the guest cabin. The warm glow of the porch light flickered, and for a moment, I thought about my grandfather rocking in his old chair out there, watching the lake as the sun set. He always told me, "Son, property is freedom. You let someone take that, you let them take everything." His voice echoed in my head, and I knew right then that I wasn't going to let some HOA bully rewrite history. The cabin wasn't just a structure. It was part of my legacy. Over the next few days, I started noticing little signs of Karen's handiwork. Flyers appeared on my gate, reminding me of HOA obligations. A bright orange violation notice was taped to my front door, claiming my cabin was an unapproved dwelling. Strangers slowed their cars when passing, staring at the property like I was some kind of outlaw. Karen was clearly stirring the pot, spreading her narrative that I was breaking rules. I tore down each notice, crumpling them up, but I kept one in a drawer as evidence. I knew it would come in handy. By the third day, Karen escalated. I came home from a run around the lake trail to find her and 2 other HOA board members snooping around the guest cabin. They had clipboards, cameras, and were circling it like vultures around a carcass. One of them actually had the nerve to jiggle the doorknob, testing if it was locked. That was the line. I marched down the path and called out, "Hey! Step away from my cabin." They froze, then Karen turned with a smug grin. "We're conducting an inspection," she announced. "This dwelling hasn't been approved by the HOA, and we need to verify its condition for community use. Cooperate, or this will get worse for you." My patience snapped. "Inspection? This isn't your property. You have 5 seconds to get off my land before I call the sheriff." She rolled her eyes. The sheriff doesn't enforce HOA disputes. But she was wrong, dead wrong. I wasn't bluffing. This was trespassing, plain and simple. I pulled out my phone and dialed. 10 minutes later, a patrol truck rolled up. The sheriff himself, an old friend of my dad's, stepped out. He looked at me, then at Karen, then back at me. "Same problem already?" he asked. "Yep," I said flatly. "Caught them trying to enter the cabin." Karen scoffed. "We're acting within our authority. This isn't his decision, it's ours. He's obstructing HOA operations." The sheriff shook his head slowly, resting his hand on his belt. "No, ma'am. This land and that cabin aren't HOA jurisdiction. You're trespassing. Leave now, or I'll cite you." For the first time, Karen's mask cracked. She stammered, You can't do that. I'll bring legal action. You'll see, I always win." But she didn't win that day. She left, red-faced and fuming, muttering threats under her breath. As her heels crunched away on the gravel, the sheriff leaned closer to me. "She's trouble. Watch your back. She'll push until something breaks." I nodded. I already knew. Because the way Karen looked at that cabin wasn't just about power. It was obsession. She wanted it, and she wasn't going to stop until she got burned. The morning after the sheriff had chased Karen and her little inspection crew off my property, I figured things would cool down. Maybe she'd realize I wasn't bluffing, maybe she'd finally accept that the cabin wasn't hers to claim, and maybe, just maybe, I could get a few quiet days of peace on my porch with a cup of coffee. But that was wishful thinking. HOA Karen didn't take losses lightly. If anything, the sheriff's warning only made her more determined to prove she was in charge. By sunrise, I already saw her standing across the street, arms folded, watching my driveway like some hawk circling prey. Every time I moved around the yard, she scribbled something down in her little notebook, as if she were building a case against me. The air around here was thick with tension, like a storm building over the lake. 2 days later, I came home to find a bright red notice nailed to the cabin door. It looked official at first glance, stamped with the HOA's logo and signed by Karen herself as board president. It read, "Notice of seizure. This cabin is considered community property effective immediately. Failure to vacate will result in fines, legal action, and forced removal." I couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't worth the paper it was printed on, but the arrogance behind it was astounding. I ripped it down, tossed it in the trash, and locked the cabin tighter than before. That evening, I got a call from a neighbor, a soft-spoken older man named Carl. He whispered over the phone, "Listen, I don't want to get caught up in this, but I thought you should know. Karen was at the board meeting last night bragging about how she's going to make an example of you. She's telling everyone you're hoarding property that belongs to the neighborhood. She said if you don't surrender the cabin voluntarily, she's going to escalate. Just watch your back." I thanked him and hung up, staring out at the water while his words sank in. Escalate. That one word clung to me like a shadow. Karen wasn't bluffing. She'd already crossed the line into trespassing, now she was scheming something bigger. My instincts told me she wouldn't fight this battle with rules, she'd weaponize lies, rumors, and intimidation. The very next morning, I found out just how far she was willing to go. I was hammering in a loose fence post near the tree line when two HOA board members marched down my driveway again, clipboards in hand. One of them, a tall guy with wire-framed glasses, announced, "We've been instructed to perform a secondary inspection on the guest cabin. Failure to comply will result in penalties." I set my hammer down, wiped the sweat from my brow, and said firmly, "You were warned. Step on this property again, and I won't just call the sheriff, I'll file charges." That's when Karen's shrill voice pierced the air. She was standing at the end of the driveway, arms flailing as she shouted, "He's hiding something in there. Don't let him stop you. That cabin isn't a guest house, it's an illegal operation. We all know it." Her accusation rang out so loud that a couple of neighbors peeked out their windows, curious. She wanted an audience, and she was spinning a narrative designed to stick. I could see the board members hesitate, clearly uncomfortable, before slowly backing away. But Karen wasn't satisfied. She marched right up, red-faced, waving that same binder in my face. "You think you're above the rules because your grandfather owned this place? Wrong," she screeched. "You can't just lock up property the community needs. You've been warned, and the next step is federal. You'll see." I didn't say another word. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of her trespassing on my land, binder in hand, spitting her threats. I figured I'd need proof, and I was right. Because Karen wasn't bluffing about her next move. That night, well past dark, I noticed headlights creeping up the road. At first, I assumed it was Karen again, but then I realized the vehicles weren't her usual SUV or board member sedans. These were large, black SUVs with tinted windows and government plates. They stopped right at my gate, engines idling low, headlights cutting across my property. My stomach tightened. This wasn't HOA business anymore. When the doors opened, men in dark suits stepped out, their posture sharp and professional. Their jackets shifted as they moved, and I caught sight of badges clipped to their belts. My heart raced. Department of Homeland Security. DHS. What in the world were they doing at my cabin? One of the agents approached me calmly, flashing his badge. "Sir, we're here on federal business. We've received a report that this property may be housing unauthorized operations. We need to take a look." Behind them, leaning against her car, was Karen, grinning from ear to ear like a cat who'd just cornered a mouse. She waved cheerfully at me and shouted, "See? I told you. Even the government agrees with me. That cabin belongs to us. You can't fool DHS." My jaw clenched. The pieces clicked into place. She had filed a complaint with the federal government, claiming I was running something shady out of the guest cabin. She had twisted her obsession into a full-blown federal investigation, all because I refused to let her daughter sleep there for a weekend. The agents were polite but firm. "Sir, we need you to unlock the building so we can verify." I could have argued, but what good would that do? They had the authority, and refusing would only make me look guilty. I nodded, walked over to the cabin, and turned the key in the lock while Karen bounced on her heels behind them like a kid waiting for Christmas morning. She was so sure I was about to be exposed, so certain that victory was finally hers. The agent stepped inside, flashlights sweeping across the walls. I followed behind, my hands shoved in my pockets. The cabin was exactly what I had left it, a tidy little retreat with a couple of beds, some fishing gear, and framed photographs of my family. There was no secret basement, no hidden compartments, no illegal operation. Just a cozy place to rest after a long day on the lake. One of the agents chuckled under his breath. "Looks more like a summer getaway than anything suspicious." Karen pushed past the doorway, shouting, "No, no, you're missing it. He's hiding something. Check the floorboards. Dig up the yard if you have to. This whole thing is a front. The lead agent turned toward her, his expression flat and unimpressed. Ma'am, you filed this report? Of course I did, she said proudly. I'm protecting the neighborhood. This man is lying, and you need to shut him down. The agent's face didn't change. Ma'am, filing false reports to a federal agency is a serious crime. Are you aware of that? Her grin faltered. She stammered, what? No, I was helping. You have to believe me. But the mood had already shifted. I leaned against the cabin doorframe, watching the color drain from her face as the agents exchanged looks. I knew right then that Karen had gone too far this time, and she wasn't the one in control anymore. The DHS wasn't here for me. They were about to turn their focus squarely on her. At first, I didn't know whether to feel angry or amused. Angry that Karen had dragged me into a federal investigation over a lie, or amused because it was already blowing up in her face. The DHS agents had that look about them, the kind of look lawmen get when they realize they're wasting their time because someone decided to cry wolf. One of the agents continued sweeping his flashlight across the cabin, peeking into the closet, opening drawers, even checking the small fridge by the corner. Everything was exactly as it should be, empty beer bottles from the last fishing trip, blankets neatly folded on the bed, a stack of old photo albums with my grandfather's handwriting scribbled across the covers. Normal. Boring. Nothing that screamed illegal operation. And I knew the more boring it looked, the worse it was going to be for Karen. She couldn't keep her mouth shut though. As the agents worked, she buzzed around them like a mosquito, pointing, demanding, insisting they rip up floorboards, check under the bed, even suggesting they dismantle the fireplace. He's clever, she shrieked. He's hiding something. People like him always hide things. You can't just look around casually, you need to dig deeper. The lead agent turned slowly toward her, his jaw set. Ma'am, we follow procedure. If you continue to interfere, you'll need to wait outside. The tone was calm but cold, the kind of tone that said he was done tolerating her antics. But Karen, never knowing when to quit, folded her arms and snapped back, you're letting him manipulate you. You people are supposed to protect communities like ours, and here you are taking his side? Do your job. The agent's eyes narrowed slightly, and I could see his patience thinning. He pulled a small folder from his bag, glanced at some paperwork, then looked at me. Sir, this property is registered under your name, correct? Correct, I said. Inherited from my grandfather. Deeds are filed at the county courthouse if you need to cross-check. He nodded once, satisfied. Then he turned back to Karen. And you filed this report stating that you had direct knowledge of criminal activity here? Absolutely, she said with fiery conviction. Everyone knows he's up to something. You can't trust people who keep cabins locked away from the community. He's hiding things from us. That guest house belongs to the neighborhood. The agent blinked at her slowly, then looked back at his partner. They shared one of those silent exchanges that said more than words ever could. It was the look of professionals realizing they weren't dealing with a witness, but with a liar. He stepped closer to her, his voice lowering. Ma'am, do you understand the severity of filing a false report to a federal agency? It's not a civil infraction. It's a felony. That word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Felony. Karen's bravado faltered, but only for a split second. Then she plastered a nervous smile on her face and laughed shakily. Oh, come on, don't be dramatic. I didn't file a false report. I was just mistaken. That's all. Someone told me he was doing something shady here, and I thought I should tell you. That's being a responsible citizen. But the agents weren't buying it. The second one spoke up, his voice sharper. We traced the report directly to you. Your name, your phone number, your signature. There's no someone else. You made the accusation. You escalated it. And now you're obstructing our work." Karen's eyes darted between them, then at me. Her expression shifted from smug to desperate, like she was realizing for the first time that she had walked herself into quicksand. But even then, she couldn't stop digging. "He tricked me," she shouted, pointing her finger at me again. "He's manipulative. He lured you out here on purpose, he staged this whole thing. You're looking in the wrong direction." The agent ignored her rant and gestured for his partner to step outside with her. But Karen refused to move. She planted her heels into the wooden floor and screamed, "You can't remove me. This is my neighborhood. This is my right." The lead agent leaned in close, his voice so low I almost didn't hear it. "Ma'am, you're one sentence away from being placed under arrest for obstruction. Do you really want to test me on this?" Silence fell over the cabin for the first time since they arrived. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Her face burned red, but for once she didn't have a comeback. The agents escorted her outside, and I followed, leaning against the porch post as the cool night air hit my skin. Across the street, neighbors were gathering quietly in the shadows, watching the spectacle unfold. Nobody dared to intervene. They all knew this was more than HOA drama now. This was federal. The lead agent made a call on his radio, speaking in clipped tones I couldn't quite catch, and within 20 minutes, more SUVs rolled up the road. Their headlights washed over the neighborhood, engines rumbling like thunder. The agents who arrived weren't here to investigate me. They were here for Karen. She tried one last time to twist the narrative, shouting, "He's lying to you. This whole community knows I'm right. You'll regret taking his side." But when one of the agents produced a set of handcuffs, her voice cracked. Wait, you can't do this. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I was protecting people. I was being vigilant." The lead agent's reply was calm but sharp as steel. "Ma'am, you filed a false report to a federal agency, knowingly wasting government resources. That is a crime. You're coming with us." Her knees buckled slightly as they turned her around and cuffed her wrists. She kicked, protested, and screamed for help, but none of the neighbors moved. In fact, some of them were recording the scene on their phones. One woman muttered, finally, under her breath. I stood there quietly, arms crossed, watching the storm unravel. Part of me felt almost sorry for her, almost. But then I remembered the threats, the trespassing, the fake notices, and the humiliation she tried to drag me through. No, this wasn't unfair. This was justice. Before they loaded her into the SUV, she twisted her head toward me and spat out, "This isn't over. I'll have a lawyer. You'll regret this." The agent holding her arm simply said, "Ma'am, you did this to yourself." And with that, the door slammed shut, and the convoy of black SUVs rolled slowly down the street, leaving behind a stunned, silent neighborhood. I exhaled, finally letting my shoulders relax. The cabin stood behind me, glowing warmly under the porch light, untouched, unclaimed, still mine. But as I turned back toward the house, one thought lingered in my mind: HOA Karen had finally been silenced, but for how long? When the black SUVs disappeared down the road and the night grew still again, I thought maybe, just maybe, life around the lake would return to normal. The crickets chirped, the moon reflected off the water, and the warm glow from my guest cabin's porch light felt like a silent reassurance that it still belonged to me, untouched. But the truth was, even though Karen was gone, her shadow lingered. The neighborhood was buzzing like a hornet's nest the next morning. I woke to the sound of whispers outside, neighbors gathered in little clusters on the street, gossip spilling faster than morning coffee. Some were wide-eyed, replaying every detail of the black SUVs and the way federal agents had cuffed Karen like she was some kind of criminal mastermind. Others defended her, claiming it was a misunderstanding, that she was just trying to protect the community. But no matter how they spun it, one fact stood tall: Karen had been taken away in front of everyone, and nobody could deny it. By midday, I started getting visitors. First, it was Carl, the older man who had warned me before. He shuffled nervously onto my porch, hat in hand, and said, "Son, I know we don't know each other well, but I want you to know most of us aren't like her. Karen's been running this HOA like it's her personal fiefdom for years, scaring folks into silence. I reckon what happened last night might finally put an end to that." He left quickly after saying his piece, clearly worried about being seen associating with me. Then came a young couple from down the street, apologizing for going along with Karen before, admitting they'd been pressured into siding with her out of fear. They left a basket of cookies on my porch as if sugar could erase months of hostility. But not everyone came with kindness. By late afternoon, 2 remaining HOA board members knocked on my door, their expressions stiff. One of them, the tall guy with wire-framed glasses, cleared his throat and said, "We want to be clear, the HOA has no involvement in what Karen did. We're re-evaluating leadership." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, and replied, "Good idea. Because if any of you try what she tried, you'll be facing the same consequences. This cabin isn't yours, it never will be, and I'm done entertaining your delusions." They didn't argue. They just nodded curtly and walked away, clearly rattled by how far things had spiraled. That night, I sat by the lake with a cup of coffee, listening to the waves lap against the dock. For the first time in weeks, I felt peace. But peace has a way of being temporary when people like Karen are involved. 2 days later, word spread that she'd posted bail and was already threatening to sue anyone who defamed her. She wasn't back on the street yet, but her lawyer had been sniffing around, sending letters to the HOA board and even to some neighbors. One letter found its way to my mailbox. It was filled with legal jargon, claiming I had harassed and defamed Karen by weaponizing federal resources against her. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. She was the one who had called DHS with a bogus story, and now she wanted to flip the script? I called my cousin, he works for DHS himself, and showed him the letter. He chuckled and said, "Don't worry about her. She's in way over her head. Filing a false federal report isn't something you walk away from. If anything, the fact that she's doubling down is only going to dig her hole deeper." He wasn't kidding. Within a week, DHS agents came back, not for me, but for follow-up on her. They collected statements from me, the sheriff, and even a couple of neighbors who had witnessed her antics. The case against her was stacking higher than she could climb. Meanwhile, the HOA crumbled without her iron fist. Meetings turned chaotic, board members resigned, and neighbors who had once been silent began speaking out about the years of bullying, fines, and threats Karen had dished out. It was like a dam had burst. For the first time, people were realizing they didn't have to live under her thumb. Some even suggested disbanding the HOA entirely. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen had tried to claim my guest cabin as her victory trophy, and instead, she destroyed the very power she used to control everyone. Still, I wasn't naive. People like Karen don't just disappear. Even from afar, even facing charges, I knew she would scheme. Sure enough, one evening as I walked back from the dock, I noticed a car parked across the street. Not her usual SUV, but I recognized the shape of the figure inside. Karen. She wasn't supposed to be near me or my property under the conditions of her release, but there she was, glaring from behind the windshield, eyes burning with the kind of obsession that doesn't fade with time. I didn't confront her. I didn't need to. I snapped a photo with my phone and called the sheriff. 10 minutes later, she was gone again, pulled over down the road. The sheriff came by afterward and shook his head. She's addicted to control. But she's on a short leash now. Every stunt she pulls just makes her case worse. He wasn't wrong. And though it was frustrating, I felt oddly calm. For the first time, Karen wasn't the one in power. She wasn't the one dictating terms. The law was, and it was closing in on her with every step. Weeks passed. Life slowly returned to normal. The guest cabin stood untouched, a silent reminder of everything that had happened. I fixed up the porch swing, added a fresh coat of paint, and even hosted my parents for a weekend. We sat out by the fire pit, laughed about the absurdity of it all, and toasted marshmallows under the stars. It felt like reclaiming not just the cabin, but the peace Karen had stolen. The final blow came in the form of an official letter from DHS, thanking me for my cooperation and informing me that Karen's case had moved forward to federal court. The charges included filing a false report, obstruction, and harassment. The letter also made clear that my property was never, at any point, under suspicion. I framed that letter and hung it in the cabin's entryway. A reminder, not of the trouble, but of the fact that truth and patience win in the end. As for Karen, she became a cautionary tale whispered around the lake. Some neighbors pitied her, others despised her, but nobody defended her anymore. The woman who once strutted down the street barking orders was reduced to a hushed story of arrogance gone too far. And me? I got exactly what I wanted from the start. Peace, freedom, and the right to enjoy my grandfather's land without interference. Now, every evening when I sit on that porch swing at the guest cabin, watching the sun dip below the trees, I think about how close Karen came to taking it all away. She underestimated me, underestimated my family, and most importantly, underestimated the law. And in the end, it wasn't me who lost, it was her, loaded into a black SUV while the whole neighborhood watched. That's the image that stays burned into everyone's memory. And sometimes, when I hear the faint hum of an engine on the distant road, I smile to myself, because I know one thing for certain, DHS doesn't show up for me. They show up for people like Karen who think they can bend the world to their will. And once they roll up in those black SUVs, the game is over.